First up, we have a really fantastic, interesting woman who's staging a play about cosmic trigger. And who knows what cosmic trigger is? Okay, that's good news. So I'm going to let her explain all about it. So please give a huge, super weird happening welcome to the fantastic Daisy Eris Campbell. And she's staging a play about cosmic trigger. So please give it up, Daisy Eris Campbell, in the most convoluted entrance we could manage.
Thank you very, very much. Yes, I'm staging a play called Cosmic Trigger, and I'd like to tell you the strange tale of how it came about, if I may. I want to take you back to this moment that I experienced 5 years ago. It was a couple of weeks after my father, Ken Campbell, I don't know if you know, heard of this guy, pretty cool dude. There's Ken. And it was a couple of weeks after his sudden and untimely death. And I was standing at the crossing point of a number of cobbled streets in Liverpool in the rain, and I was looking up at this bust of Carl Gustav Jung, the psychologist. And that was kind of odd, because right at that moment I was in the middle of an essay about Carl Jung for this master's degree that I was doing, but that wasn't why I was there. And I wasn't alone. Stood with me was G, Chris Langham, and this chap called Peter Halligan, and we're all looking up at this bust of Carl Jung. The bust is there because Carl Jung had a dream about Liverpool, in which he realised that Liverpool is in fact the pool of life. And he wrote about this dream in his book Memories, Dreams and Reflections on page, and remember this, 223. And in this dream there was a kind of pool and whatnot, and a kind of magnolia tree coming out of it. But Jung writes that he thinks this might be the most important dream he's ever had, and for a man who puts a lot of store by his dreams, that's quite a statement. And there we are looking up at this bust, and I'm in the middle of this essay all about Jung's ideas of the collective unconscious and synchronicity, a phrase which he coined. And now I'm looking at this bust of his head. And then I realise the bust has only been erected due to the tireless campaigning of this chap that I'm stood next to, Peter Halligan. Because Peter Halligan reckons that this spot is the exact site of Jung's dream. And there's another odd thing to the side. There's this plaque on the wall, and it says, "The Liverpool School of Language, Music, Dream and Pun." And that plaque has also only been erected due to the tireless campaigning of this chap, Peter Halligan, because about 40 years previously, when Halligan first found this Jung dream site after a not inconsiderable quest, he noticed that the building on the corner of a couple of the streets was in fact empty. And so he claimed it, and he called it the Liverpool School of Language, Music, Dream and Pun, and it was a kind of theatre, a community centre, a cafe, and the first production to go on there was an 18-hour epic called Illuminatus, directed by my father Ken Campbell, starring amongst many others my mother Prunella G, co-adapted by Chris Langham, and we're all there now to kind of pay tribute to this incredible production that had changed the lives of everyone involved. And I said to everyone gathered, you know, it's kind of odd to be stood here, because right at this moment I'm up against a deadline for this essay about Jung. And then I suddenly thought, just a minute, that master's degree I'm doing, it's a distance course, so I don't actually have to turn up at the place, but it is in fact based at John Moores University, Liverpool. And then Peter Halligan says, "Oh, John Moores, yeah, he knew your dad's dad." I said, "Really?" He said, yeah, John Moores went to your grandfather with this business venture, but your grandfather declined. It was the football pools, right? And it made John Moores a multi-millionaire, which was how come he had the money to build this university where I was now studying Jung. And my head was starting to spin a bit at this point, and then my mother said to me, "And you do know you were conceived in that building?" I said, "What?" They said, "What? Hang on, surely you were a bit too busy staging the greatest show on planet World." And she said, "Oh, darling, it was 18 hours long. There were some dull bits." So, I'm standing on the site where I was conceived, which is also the site of Jung's most important dream, whilst in the middle of writing an essay about Jung and looking at a bust of his head, and built at a university with money that would have been mine were it not for my grandfather's lack of business acumen, where my father staged an epic which was to change the lives of everyone involved, and when my mother played Eris, goddess of chaos and confusion, which has now become my middle name. And you're really going to tell me there's nothing to this synchronicity lark? So listen, the funny thing was that growing up, I knew all about the legends surrounding this production of Illuminatus, but my dad was really cagey about letting me actually get my hands on a copy. So it wasn't until I was in my 20s, 23 to be exact, that I actually finally got around to reading this book. And how to explain it? It was like being initiated into a very funny, magical order that almost everyone I knew was already an initiate of. It was like I could finally speak the language of my tribe. You know, I could spot 23s with the best of them. I knew all about the ancient battle between the Bavarian Illuminati and the Discordians. I understood that communication is only possible between equals, why you should never whistle while you're pissing, and what the true meaning of the eye in the pyramid on every dollar bill really is. And then I began to see meaning and synchronicity and coincidence everywhere, and life became true meaningful. And to cut a long story short, I found myself in a very plush loony bin somewhere in Kent with rainbow knickers on my head for important cosmic reasons. This is the kind of wonderful, if somewhat worrying thing about this book, Illuminatus, is that almost everyone I know who has known and loved and read that book has got a pretty similar story to tell. I mean, some are not quite as extreme, some are a lot more extreme, but tales of bizarre synchronicities are pretty standard, and there's often some kind of story of a spiritual emergency, as Stanislav Grof might call it, or temporary psychosis, as the rest of the medical establishment might have it. And this is the kind of experience that Robert Anton Wilson wrote about. Robert Anton Wilson being the co-author of Illuminatus. He wrote about in his book Cosmic Trigger. He called it A Journey Through Chapel Perilous. This is like a dangerous psychological crossing point brought about, usually, not always, but usually through researching the occult, and from which one can only emerge either paranoid or agnostic. And when he says agnostic, he doesn't just mean agnostic about God, he means agnostic about everything. Which I suddenly put me in mind of what my dad was always saying to me. He always said to me, "Now listen, Daisy," that's how he spoke. "Listen, Daisy, don't believe anything, right? Nothing which is the product of a human mind is a fitting subject for your belief. But you can suppose anything, and you should, yeah, because it's very mind-expanding and mind-widening. So, you know, suppose in flying saucers, suppose in crystals and fairies and God knows what. I suppose you can suppose in God if you must. You could even suppose that one of the big religions had actually got it right down to the last nut and bolt. But listen to me, Daisy, don't believe it." Or as Robert Anton Wilson more succinctly puts it, convictions cause convicts. So, I was in this loony bin somewhere in Kent with rainbow knickers on my head. I said it was for important cosmic reasons. It was. I was attempting to regulate the flow of pronoid synchronicities that I was now experiencing on a daily basis, hourly basis. You're familiar with the idea of pronoia? That creeping sensation that everyone everywhere is out to help you. So I believe that paranoids favour tinfoil, but I was pronoid, right? So rainbow knickers was the apt thing. And I was holding forth one day in my rainbow knickers about my father's notions of artist's choice. Do you know this one? There are 3 choices open to the artist. 1, you can distract and entertain and thereby deceive about the true nature of things, thus helping to sustain the status quo. Choice 2, you can pose as exposing wrongs, but in fact deceive and therefore help to sustain the status quo. Choice 3, you can expose wrongs and bring about change. A choice, according to my dad, not really possible, because if you really know what's going on, then you can be sure they've got something on you. But there might just be a fourth choice. To pose as exposing wrongs, but in fact deceive, but with such a willful mix of truth and lie, research and fantasy, so inscrutably compounded as to send the status quo hunting for needles but nobody's lost in haystacks which don't exist, therefore distracting from the ensuing release of hitherto imprisoned forces which will bring about change, but of an unpredictable nature. And there was this chap stood back from the rest of the group who was not at all amused by the arrival of Rainbow Girl. And he looked me in the eye and he said, "So how long have you been stuck up your father's arsehole?" I said, "I honestly don't know." Anyway, so it's 5 years since the Rainbow Knickers. Also, I have to tell you, the inmates all gathered round. I must tell you this bit. The inmates all gathered round me on the first morning that I arrived to ask me, well, what are you in for? I said, synchronicity has led me here. And so completely trusting was I by now in all these various signs that were appearing. I said, look, if you just hand me that magazine you're holding, I'll open it at any random page. It will tell me exactly what it is I'm doing here. This girl was clutching soap opera magazine, so she handed it over to me. I opened it at any random page, and it said, and I kid you not, in huge pink letters, across a double-page spread, Daisy must lose some of her passion. Ooh. Anyway, that's what Daisy did, and 10 years later, I honestly thought I'd got that old crazy maker Eris back in her box. So it's 10 years now since the Rainbow Knickers and Daisy must lose some of her passion, and it's 5 years since I was looking up at Jung's bust in Liverpool, and it's 35 years since my dad was in Compendium Bookshop in Camden Town, collecting up a little armful of science fiction books, because he had this notion. He just had a phone call from Peter Halligan of the Liverpool School of Language, Music, Dream and Pun to say, "You're going to come and stick on anything here then, Ken?" And Ken said, "Yeah, I will." And he had this notion about a science fiction theatre, because as he said to me, think about it, the entire history of literature is actually nothing more than people coming in and out of doors, whereas science fiction is about everything else. So he had this kind of armful of science fiction books, and then he got to the counter and there was a book with a yellow submarine on the front. He thought, that's interesting. Did I mention that the Liverpool School of Language, Music, Dream and Pun is about a minute away from the Cavern Club where the Beatles first performed? He thought, this bodes well. I know, I'll test it. Now, Jung's dream was on page 223 of Memories, Dreams and Reflections, so I'll turn to page 223 of this submarine book, and if it's interesting, I'll stick on a production of that. And so he did, and who should be mentioned on page 223 but Carl Gustav Jung. So, 10 years since the Knickers, 5 years since the bust, and I get a phone call to say, Daisy, could we meet to discuss the possibility of staging Illuminatus? And I thought, oh no, here we go. I remembered my dad's really worried face any time anyone ever mooted the possibility of bringing that show back. It was not without its casualties, ladies and gentlemen. And then I remembered the Rainbow Knickers, and I also remembered that I am supposedly trying to get out of my father's arsehole, and perhaps staging yet another one of his epics might not be my quickest route. So I declined. But then in the same week, from someone completely unrelated to the first person, I got another phone call to say, Daisy, could we meet to discuss the possibility of staging Illuminatus? And I thought, shit, here we go. Illuminatus-related synchronicities are back, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to outrun them this time, nor do I think it would be cosmically wise. And so I just knew I didn't want to go backwards. I didn't want to go backwards to Illuminatus. And I thought, okay, well, what is the logical next step to this puzzle then? I knew the forces of something were asking something of me, and then I was at a party actually, and I suddenly went, Cosmic Trigger, the book that Robert Anton Wilson wrote directly after Illuminatus. He felt compelled to write it to deal with what happened to him as a result of writing Illuminatus. And when you think what happened to me and many others just as a result of reading it, you can begin to imagine the strangeness this book contains. I was really excited now. I couldn't wait to get home, dig out my dad's old copy. Here it is. This is his actual original copy. Look at it. And I thought, I better test it. I'll turn to page 223. There it is. You can see it's been opened there a few times. It says at the bottom of page 223, but on November 23rd, 1976, a sacred Discordian holy day, both because of the 23 and because it is Harpo Marx's birthday, a most ingenious young Englishman named Ken Campbell premiered a 10-hour adaptation of Illuminatus at the Science Fiction Theatre of Liverpool. Shit! Well, if that ain't a sign, then I don't know what is. So I got to work creating this adaptation, and it's all happening, guys. You know, the first thing that happened was I knew it had to happen on November 23rd, right? And then I thought, it's got to happen in Liverpool, the pool of life. So we all went back there to kind of do a little talk about it and enact a scene and ask Liverpool, should we pull the cosmic trigger here in Liverpool? And they all said, yeah, we should, we absolutely should. And then I started floundering a bit and thinking, oh, do you know what, this is all probably a bit too cosmic for modern sophisticates. I mean, if you don't know the book, it's about a time when Robert Anton Wilson was hanging out with the likes of Timothy Leary, William Burroughs, Alan Watts. He was cooking up ideas for immortality, space migration, taking a hell of a lot of acid, getting into the teachings of Aleister Crowley, and then stumbling upon a 6,500-year-old dialogue with the dog star Sirius. I mean, it's cosmic stuff, right? I thought, oh, no one's going to be interested in this anymore. And then I got a phone call from my mum, original goddess of chaos and confusion. She says, this brilliant chap, John Higgs, has just been around to get pictures of me as Eris, and he's written a whole book about why the KLF burned £1 million. He reckons it's 5 influences: your dad in Illuminatus, Alan Moore, Doctor Who, who else was it? Discordianism, which is the religion that worships Eris, the goddess of chaos and confusion. What's the 5th one? Anyone who's read it? Can't remember. Anyway, and so the 5 influences on why the KLF came to burn £1 million. And so I met up with John, and he said, yeah, there is an audience for Robert Anton Wilson-related theatre. The time is ripe, in fact. If you get a chance to read John's book, KLF, the band that burned £1 million, it is the gateway drug to all that I discuss here tonight and very much more. And because of meeting John, as synchronicity would have it, off we went to meet up with Alan Moore and record his voice to play Fuck Up, the world's most intelligent computer. And it was while I was with Alan Moore, he said, oh yeah, well, you know, I can't do his voice, art and magic are the same thing, but there's high art and there's high magic. And that's high magic is when you don't know what the fuck you're doing, but you just proceed as if everything is an instruction from the forces that be. I thought, yeah, that's exactly how we're going to do this. And that's what we've been doing, ladies and gentlemen. We had a crowdfund. We raised enough money to get this thing off the ground, not to really pay anyone, but just to at least get it going. We're putting an entire festival on in Liverpool to celebrate the life and times of Robert Anton Wilson. We will be pulling the cosmic trigger with the play up there and then transferring the play back to London for a week's run. It all kicks off, as you can imagine, on November 22nd and November 23rd. And I just want to finish on this. After that gig we did in Liverpool, about 150 of us, after the show, all marched through the streets of Liverpool, down to Matthew Street, where the bust of Carl Gustav Jung is, and some chaps that really should have known better hoisted me aloft to the bust, where I placed a pair of ceremonial rainbow knickers upon the head of Carl Gustav Jung as protection for Discordians and synchronicity seekers everywhere. And then as I looked up at the benickered bust of Carl Gustav Jung, I thought, I know why his dream of Liverpool was the most important dream he ever had. It was the moment that he realised he was finally out of Freud's arsehole. Thank you very much, Susan.